NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul Security Weekly. Join us for a webcast with Signal Sciences. The topic is going to be answer the question, which way should you shift testing in the SDLC? It's way more interesting maybe than the title sounds. I don't know. It's going to be a lot of fun. Like myself, Larry Pesci, and Zane Lackey. I mean, just if you think about those cast of characters, it's going to be a lot of fun.
I don't see how you could go wrong with that.
Right? I don't know. I think we got the title wrong.
Even if it has SDLC in the title.
Registrations are kind of low. I think it could be title related.
SDLC scares people. They run for the exits.
When I heard that Zane, Larry, and I were going to be on the webcast, we're talking about software security. I'm like, this is going to be all. I'm like excited. And apparently our audience, I don't know. It's just going to be fun.
Just a later living crowd.
Yeah, just tune in. I mean, if you got to deal with application security, which is many of us that work in security today, you should join.
Many of us who use applications.
So you're saying there's still great seats available.
Or if you have people that use applications in your environment, you should join. That's pretty much everyone.
Yeah, I think that's everyone now.
November 8th, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You still have time to register. Make sure you go to securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. I would like to introduce our next guest, Yossi Sassi. He is on the advisory board at Javelin Networks. And I have to say, I don't know Yossi very well yet, but if I were trapped in a country and like I had lost my wallet and had no other way out and I needed help, Yossi would be the first person that I would call. And I guarantee you that I would get out unscathed. Yeah. So, Yossi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Welcome. Thanks, everybody. So basically, today we're going to talk about try catch. So this try catch, this cat and mouse stuff is something that I know and many of you probably know from pen testing, red teaming, adversary simulations, and the likes. And it's basically try catch because obviously in code you try, and if something goes wrong, then you go to the catched clause, and you try not to be catched, right?
Yeah, and so Yossi, I like this. When Yossi and I were chatting about, when I used to do pen testing and pen testers today, I'm like, I'd love to be able to cover my tracks, like delete logs and do stuff like that. I'm like, mostly that's not allowed. And Yossi's like, well, I do some tests where that is allowed. I'm like, you need to talk about that because that's awesome. So carry on, Yossi.
Cool. Yes. So definitely credit to Paul for the idea, because we were just, jamming with ideas, and this one came up. So I said, cool, why not? So let's throw some thoughts and notes from the field, from my experience as a pen tester. So like Paul said, I'm basically an AD protector. I've been with Active Directory since the early beta with NT5, and I'm also an Oriental rock buzu guitarist. I guess you didn't have that in the show.
That's very interesting.
Before.
I'm going to have to Google that.
Yeah. And I have my own small firm. I've been independent for like a decade now. My own security boutique firm that called CyberArt with a T, not ARC. Although we do know the guys from CyberArk very well. And of course, with Javelin, we're doing really interesting stuff with protecting Active Directory. And I'm basically a white hat and working mainly with banks and government and military, but all kinds of customers. And I've been with music and computers for like 30 years each. So when you were Googling me, I understood, Paul, you didn't find any security blogs, but because all the first results are guitars and rock stages. And
yeah, I thought it was someone else. I'm like, oh, there must be another Yossi Sassi out there that's a musician, but it turns out it's the same person, which is awesome.
So that's the first stage in any attack is like the public recon, and I try to I use it very wisely. So all my public recon is fully scattered with this musician guy, whoever it is.
Right, that's awesome.
But basically, I'm in the shell. That's my hacker nickname, and just enjoying myself. So let's talk about the classic life cycle of a pen testing engagements, etc. So we all know about that, the different stages, recon, persistence, etc. But we hardly speak about the clearing of tracks and removal of evidence. And that's for a good reason, because that's basically something that the bad guys have to think about, right? Because when you're like when you join the forces of light, like I did, to earn much less and not in Bitcoin and to pay taxes, so you kind of give up on that in a stage, because in pen testing you normally not allowed to delete and your tracks, and even then, even if you were allowed, and some of my customers, especially military, they want me to try and cover my tracks because they want to learn from that. You have to be very careful, because basically, removing attack evidence from systems involves modifying and deleting, and that or stopping services, terminating processes, and that's what we'll be talking today about, this yin yang of attacker and defender. When it comes to evade detection and cover tracks, which really go along together. And to add on that, we always say this stage is at the end, but it can easily be in the beginning. Straight after the infiltration, you're beginning to do stuff, right, on your pivot machine, and from there, once you get into the organization, you're beginning to to touch stuff and to leave evidence behind, and your breadcrumbs, your digital breadcrumbs, are beginning to pile up. But interestingly enough, for most of the information, if not all of it, that you are leaving behind, the first time you'll be able to do something about it will be only later on, to add to the confusion, right? Whether it's Privesk as a local admin or domain admin, that's when you really can get into dealing with this stage. So it's kind of weird. It can happen in any stage, really, the covering of tracks. But that's mainly the big picture. So, like every big question, we have to ponder: to admin or not to admin? Because everybody's running after the privilege escalations, and everybody's speaking about and righteously about the privileged accounts, etc. But I argue for some time now, for several years, that security descriptors may matter in some cases, not always, more than the group memberships of privileged accounts. And I had this example every year. I have a couple, 3 of those. I had one from a very large bank that I did a work now a couple of months ago. That the first thing I had was when I had a domain admin user. To my surprise, I discovered that they have all kinds of deny ACLs and on the domain domain controllers OU, and they were using all kinds of things, just to make the life of a domain admin hard. It was like a sort of an experimental domain environment, and when I queried SPNs, etc., I found out some service accounts that I was much better off with them. They had really better permissions in action, that I could do with them better work than that domain admin account. And to add on that, if you're not totally convinced that it's not always best to go for the admin, but to go after the security descriptor. So there is a really cool talk from not a while ago by Will Schroeder, Harmjoy's Unintended Risk of Trusting ID, which you can, and it's really advised to look at and see some ideas that he spoke about there. So let's begin about the different things that you can do to evade detection, or do stuff, while your privilege is escalating. So there's a well-known attack called the DCSync. or basically it's the get changes all right that you can do DS replication get changes and get changes all on the domain scope, on the configuration naming scope, and basically you request a domain controller to replicate AD objects. So it's a user, a normal account that it's granted a specific object access type of permission, and then you can just use get NC changes, RPC calls, and behave as if you were a DC asking to replicate with others. So the way that you can find users that do that, which really helps you solve a lot of lateral movements and actions of the likes. If you found those users really early, you can look for the DCSync write in Active Directory. Actually, every domain user can do that, this simple query, and you can possibly target those simple accounts. Normally, they will be all kinds of sync connectors, like a domain user, normal domain user with a specific write. You see it with the Azure, the AD Azure connector, SharePoint connectors, etc. Those accounts have that permission, so you can go for that low-hanging fruits. But you can also add this right to a regular user, whether an existing user or one that you create. So, but that to do that with this ACLs or the likes, that requires obviously a domain or enterprise admin or domain admin. So let's just see that really quickly in action. So basically here we have a script, all the scripts and all the code I'm demoing. I put it on my GitHub. So after the session, you'll have everything for you. So basically this is a straightforward PowerShell script that just goes, queries the domain naming context as well as the configuration naming context, and just looks for that specific object type access control list. And those two specific ones, the directory, replicate directory changes and replicate directory changes all, and just takes out this simple
Yossi,
report.
Hold on. This just is really bizarre. So to have the privilege of replicating a domain controller, I don't need any other type of authentication or authorization other than like my user role in the organization has been allowed to do that?
In order to find, in order to query access control list from AD objects, in order to find them, you don't need the.
Oh, okay. To find them, you don't need. Yep. Okay.
Just to query. By default, Active Directory is a wonderful database that lets you. It has a huge amount of trust between the database of all those entities and all those juicy stuff and any endpoint. So any domain user really gets access to a plethora of. Anything you want.
So in this, I'm finding which users and or groups would have permission to initiate an Active Directory replication.
Right. That's what this script does, and just to know these groups and to begin to target them, you don't have to have any special permission, and then you can get just this simple report, and to see this just the specific users that you can. Go ahead and target later.
Gotcha.
If you want to add the right, that's where you need the permissions. So there you're right about the right. There you really need to escalate to a domain or enterprise admin in order to be able to grant this permission. So these first ones go for the domain, and the other ones go for the configuration naming context. So that's briefly about the DCSync method, and it's implemented in few scripts and few frameworks with PowerShell and others and Mimikatz. The limitation is that it's read-only, so you don't have any ability to modify or inject data to Active Directory itself. So, but you can, but it will be very hard without being detected, because this user allows you to read hashes, of any user, KERP-TGT, any domain admin, and you can obviously continue to pass the hash, etc. But those kind of attacks are quite, noisy, and there's a multiple tools and methods to detect those.
Is there a record of the read-only query?
Of the read-only query, yes. Actually, if you turn on certain DS access type of events in auditing in group policy. So you can see somebody trying to exercise this right.
But that's not on by default.
No, that's certainly not on by default, and not on by the second and third and fourth default. Normally you would be,
it's true.
Yeah. Normally system admins, they will be turning on at least 10, 20 other things before that, including auditing of files of some finance report on a server before they would think about DS access and LDAP object access rights. So that's nice to exercise, but once you want to do really juicy stuff with that, like pass the hash and stuff, that's when you begin to be noisy, and there are a bunch of tools to try and catch you on that. Let's move on to the next part, which is DCShadow. So DCShadow is basically the evolution of Mimikatz, the well-known work of Benjamin Delpy, and this time with Vincent Leton, I think, how you pronounce the name, I'm not sure. But they did something really great. They had the POC of reverse engineering the Azure sync tool to basically they took the plugin in C# and reverse engineered it. And what they do is they simulate the behavior of a DC via RPC. So basically, you simulate a domain controller. You take a normal computer account, and when you think about it, a domain controller essentially is just a computer that hosts a service, right? And it has certain SPNs, service principal names. It has another thing or two that define it as a domain controller. So once you take care of those things, so you can have yourself a domain controller to behave equal among equals and do read-write stuff. And this, we've had all kinds of Active Directory abuse attacks for years now, but most of them were either offline, you had to get a copy of the NTDS DIT offline, or you had to do really quite a lot of effort. So the ROI on those attacks is not always worthwhile. But this attack, DCShadow, allows you to do an online database modification of Active Directory with bypassing monitoring. Because what this allows you is you can push changes to Active Directory, actually create backdoors with permissions, SIDs, etc., without any logging, because we're writing directly with RPC calls that are intended only for domain controllers. So on the network level.
Yossi, if I understand this correctly, basically you can make a domain controller replicate its information to you and then impersonate another domain controller with the purpose of making changes to that and pushing it back to the real domain controller.
Right. Basically, you take a computer account, normal computer account, you add to it, you register it as a server replica, and you create what you need for the structure, under configuration, container LDAP and the DRS add entry. You add the SPNs, and then you just trigger the connection. And this is as simple as it sounds, because at the end of the day, a domain controller is just a computer object that, in terms of replication, right? Not in terms of authentication and other things. But in terms of replication, it's just a computer account that has specific things. A server replica. It has certain things in CN configuration, and a specific entry for DRS, and the required SPNs. That's about it. So you can replicate with others, read-write. And this opens up the world of, beautiful stuff. You can play with SID history without any logging, because, again, we're writing directly to the database with network calls that are intended only by domain controllers and replication partners. You can add, for example, enterprise admins group SID to a user using SID history. You can modify the anti-password history. So you can change a previous password without touching the current password and without changing the last password, the last time that you changed the password. You can play with time. You can make modifications to the when changed attribute. So basically, you can change objects in the past. You can say that this object was changed not today, but yesterday or a week. You can change the primary group of an object. For example, 519. So it will be the primary group would be enterprise admins, etc., etc. And you can also erase your traces because when we speak here about tracks and the things you leave behind, what you do leave behind with all these replication calls is the replication metadata and the replication partners and the USNs, the universal sequential number, etc. All this is registered, but you can actually erase those traces as well, because if you don't do that, it will come up with tools, like rep admin, stuff like that. I think maybe one of the coolest stuff you can do with that, and that's not recommended for people who are not. If you do it with a proper engagement with the customer, I wouldn't do that, of course. But it is for your lab fun. If you want to test it, you can turn off enhanced auditing altogether by setting the access control list of the admin SD holder object. And that's really not just bypassing and doing actions without any logging, but also removing the current policies and enhanced auditing that you have in Active Directory for other machines, for other places in the domain. So the DCShadow is a really genuinely and quite genius attack, I think, in terms of the tools that we have to date. But the part that sucks is that it's not really the best tool that you would use in a proper engagement, because you should be very careful about that in production environments. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what objects you're touching. Some things are maybe harmless, when changed, stuff like that. But if you begin to mess with other things, you can get things, not to play correctly. And that you should be very careful about that. And if you're going to utilize that, I wouldn't suggest any automated framework or just the tools. I would suggest that very well the schema and Active Directory structure in general, and know what to do and what not. So DCShadow, very cool, but not always useful for pen testing and the likes. Let's talk a bit about the event logs. Event logs is essentially the place where the events get logged. So that's a good place to look at when we speak about clearing tracks. So in event logs, you have it locally, you have it remotely on other machines, etc. Organizations collect logs, either by the forwarding or to syslog, other kinds of same systems. In event logs, you have a few options. Basically, let's start with a very simple option, which is to clear log. Obviously, this is not something you want to do at the customer site. And in general, clearing logs is, it's very clear that it happened. There is an event that the event log was cleared, and not a practical move. You can also stop the event log service. At the end of the day, it's just an SVC host. It's just a shared process that has, it hosts the threads of event log among some others. But this is also not cool because, firstly, most pen testing engagements won't let you do that. You're not allowed to stop that because you will harm other events that are trying to get written. And the second, if they allow you, and I was in more than one or two engagement that they allowed me to stop services, including the event log, that's easily detected. So I think if at all customers do anything about monitoring, is they monitor services, right? It's like the most basic after ping, after you check that the host is online, you check services. So they can easily see that it stopped. So what about terminating just the event log threads? Meaning to open the thread, terminate it, and then close the handles. So basically, the service is running, the event log is working apparently properly, but nothing gets logged. So that's something you can easily do with kernel 32 calls, and that requires only local admin, so something that is relatively more easy to achieve than the domain admin. And simply by restarting the service, you will renew the logging. So that's also not too harmful and it's quite stable to do that, not too harmful on the environment. So let's just see that here for a second. So at the moment, if we look at this machine, so we can see we have, I'm looking at the PowerShell operational event log, and we can see we have some recent events, and that's the last event is here from a few minutes ago. So let's do an action just to see that it's properly logged. For example, let's we can create a user or anything. Let's log on with a user. So that's the user in domain McDonald's. And once we log on with this user with a new process, so obviously we'll get the event, and you can see we have a new event. And once we refresh, so we see we have a new logon event, and oops, sorry, I'm not looking at the right event log, but we have the PowerShell event as well. So we have, of course, in the security event log, we'll have the recent event, as you see, 1137. So that's the one we just created. There's a new logon assigned, the 4672, but before that we have the 46 with the new logon. So we see the user that's logged in, Mike, he created a new logon with the user Yossi. So that's fairly straightforward. What we will do is use a script called, well, you can do it in multiple ways. You can write the code in Python or whatever you want, but we'll be using a tool called Invoke Phantom, which is basically a PowerShell script written by Khalil DZ. I'm not sure about his last name, so we'll stay with that.
Sounded good to me.
Yeah. So let me just see. We'll take one of those shells here, and we just run this in a minute. Let's see what we have here. So yeah, so we'll be terminating the thread for the event log. And once this runs, the invoke phantom, so it's enumerating threads, and obviously once it finds, it's looking, basically what it does, it's looking for the process ID of the SVC host that holds the process of the threads of the event viewer. And once it finds them, it just kills them by the PID. And now basically, if we look back at the event viewer, so this is the event viewer as we remembered it, and let's do any type of action. For example, let's redo the logging with a different user. The VMs are a bit, it's like a farm machine, but they're a bit slow, sorry about that, but hopefully it's enough for what we need. So should be something happening in a minute.
And Yossi, was this the technique we were talking about where you can mask your presence, but kind of like what you were talking about just earlier, where like there's no clear indication from a sysadmin or network security analytics perspective that someone's messed with logging, but you can kind of mask some of your behavior, right?
Yeah, that's. I will get to that in a minute. So
okay.
Anyway,
sorry, I was really excited about that. Obviously.
Yeah. You should be. You should be. It's very exciting. So basically, now the event log is not registering anything. Let's try and see why the shells are not working as well. But anyway, so we'll just continue with that. You'll have to believe me that it's totally working, but and that's really straightforward as well. So we'll just have to restart service. I'm not sure why it's not writing or responding, but we'll need it to. Oh, here we go. So something is happening, and so we'll just restart the event log because we'll need that for later. So, and we'll need the force because it's has dependencies. Sorry, and okay. Oh, it's not elevated. Okay, the share is not elevated. Let's do it from here. Oh, here's the pop-up. Now you show it to me. Okay, so it was hiding somewhere there. But just for the sake of continuing with because I want to show you exactly what you just said, and for that we'll have to restart the service of the event log, and once we get that restarted, we can log events back on. So now we restarted the event log, and we continue with that. So basically, let's speak about what I told you before. So by the way, just to wrap up the thing about the event log, you can terminate the event log with threads, of course, and restart it, but Blue Team obviously can look out for anomalies, meaning if you're not writing any events, if they're not getting any events from that machine for a certain period of time, so they can get suspicious, you know. But that's the only cons that this method has. So let's move on to something a bit more original. For example, let's talk about protected event logging. Protected event logging is part of Microsoft's PowerShell Hearts the Blue Team. This is like so-called the Bible of PowerShell security mechanisms. It's a well-known MSDN paper document by Lee Holmes about PowerShell, and it really outlines amazing things there, because PowerShell, as you know, it's a CMD on steroids, and it can do invocations, obfuscation stuff. It can run code in memory without touching the disk. You can run PowerShell without PowerShell exe. It's really a beautiful tool. So there is an issue. Sometimes you can log PowerShell events with module logging, etc., and you can get in the event viewer all the actual commands that are ran by console and scripts. But the issue is sometimes the content that gets logged may contain sensitive data. For example, credentials may, if you're not too careful about them, but even other things that seem more straightforward, like connection strings, even server names and some entities. In general, when you log PowerShell commands, you log not only the attacker, you log basically, most of the time you log yourself, the IT, right? But once the attacker gets to that machine, and when he later compromises that, he has all this log data, it can really be useful for reconnaissance. So the solution Microsoft offers, for now I'm talking just about the Blue Team solution, is to encrypt data that PowerShell writes event log using something called CMS. CMS, it stands for cryptographic message syntax. And this is basically asymmetric encryption that you use a public key. It's just you flip on a registry key in the station. You can do it also with group policies, and you can from that moment on, all your PowerShell script content gets logged, but it gets logged encrypted with using the public key in the station. And later you can decrypt and analyze that when you forward them or move them to a centralized syslog, and then you can use the private key to decrypt and parse the events. It's an industry standard, IETF standard, fully compatible with OpenSSL. Beautiful thing. So that's really an advanced Blue Team technique that Microsoft offers. So, oh my God, what's happening? Live.
You've been ransomware live.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Ransomware, would you believe it? So, ransomware. So
that was awesome.
I've been thinking, a while ago, I had some thoughts about this protected event logging, and I thought, why not use the defense for offense? So I was thinking ransomware for event logs. So what I do in my engagements, I introduce the first moment I have a local admin that I can write this certificate and use it and to change that HKLM key. So I just create this certificate and I encrypt the logs. Only I encrypt them with my own certificate. So basically everything gets logged, everything is fine. The machine sends logs, forwards logs to the syslog, but they're all encrypted. And once they wake up, that'll be too late.
Right. Now, Yossi, if the organization is not encrypting logs, and then do you find that like all of a sudden they notice that logs are being generated and they are encrypted, and that in and of itself is an anomaly, or does it take them some time to figure out that the logs that are actually going to the event log are actually encrypted?
Yeah, from my experience, sadly, no customer noticed that, and that doesn't goes to say that they're not responsible customers. They're all enterprise customers, and they know what they're doing. It's just that they don't necessarily parse those events in real time. So some events, they have, how SIEM system works. They have their rules and playbooks and the triggers. So basically, the classic SIEM system is that you parse and analyze in real time user logons and permissions and stuff like that, but you don't parse partial logging. That's like something they collect for audit. Like if you have a breach, so later they will go and look at it. It's like a journal that you. So once that, because they do it aftermath, they do it after the action. That's why it's so useful, this method. And to add on top of it, if you think about a real attacker now, not pen testing, even when they detect it, it's too late and it's useless, because without the private key, they won't be able to do anything with that data. So you can rest assured that everything you do is totally covered. And we can, if this machine behaves, we can see a quick demo of that. I'm not sure how we are on the times. I have a couple more slides, but
this is super interesting, so continue. Don't worry about the time.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's just go back to the PowerShell operational event log, which we were at before. This slow server is killing me. And okay. So on the PowerShell operational log, that's where you get the PowerShell events. You get them in other places, but that's where you see the actual execution. So most of the time, you will want to look at events 4104, which is essentially the commands that get executed. And in those type of events, you're likely to find, if you run some codes, you're likely to find some interesting stuff. Let's do, just a second, I'll just close this. And so let's get rid of that. So basically, we can look at the event viewer also from here. And when we look at that's not that, but that's just for fun. That's my malware. It runs an encoded B64 command that runs a Mel Gibsonware. So basically, when we look at, keeps missing that. Should be one less. It's so slow. And that's okay. So basically, when we run that, so you see the entries from the event log. We're looking at the messages, so you see them as is, meaning that if now I run, for example, this script, which is basically it's an encoded command, a malware so-called. It runs a Gibson malware, a Mel Gibsonware. So if you look at that, it's basically what I'm doing here is a sort of a basic obfuscation, right? It's just an encoded command, a base 64, that runs the actual command that gets executed. But that's the beauty about Microsoft's security mechanisms, that they allow you with module logging, they allow you to see the actual command that gets run. So if we'll clear all this and we'll look again at the event viewer, the PowerShell event viewer about the commands that got run, so we'll see the actual command. So you can see here the deobfuscated command. That's what my encoded command was doing, right? So what we can do is we can enable partial protected event logging. And this happens with a PowerShell script as well. It's basically a registry entry, and what it takes is it takes as an input the certificate thumbprint of a document encryption certificate, and we're just creating that under HK local machine software. And if we look at the certificate we're using, that's a certificate for document encryption, and so basically that's the one. And we just need the public key portion for that to work, because we encrypt. I remind you that we encrypt the event log with the public key. So as you see, this is the one that you need, and this will all be detailed in the resources at the end of the talk. And now when we go back to our PowerShell, and we will run the malware script again. So now it's running the malware, so-called malware. And when we look at the PowerShell events, which will be on in a second. So when we look at the events, that's what we get. So basically, somewhere here is the commands that I ran. Good luck.
Yeah, and if you're doing pen testing today and you're like, this is a great idea, make sure you have permission, right? Because if you don't back out the change, right, Yossi, that you're talking about, if that machine does get infected with actual malware from
all
an
your
attacker,
logs are gone.
Yeah, all your logs are still going to be encrypted.
And you get something like that. You know?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's the idea behind using the defense technique for your offensive, and that's a pretty neat idea, and it works beautiful because blue team doesn't check it too often. It's not like logon events or something, you know, that people look at on a daily basis, and once they discover it, it's too late and they can do nothing about that.
Mm. And there a lot of log parsing and log searching engines wouldn't find anything either because it's just encrypted, so it wouldn't see like key strings or anything like that.
Exactly. Most of the logging and parsing, even if they do check, that's a very good comment actually, because even if they do check, it will just come back empty results. Yep. So they will run regex or whatever, find strings, and they will see there's nothing suspicious about the last event.
Yep.
So that works beautifully on all fronts. Speaking about partial auditing and logging, Microsoft did some great stuff. You know, a set of capabilities, script block logging and module logging that we saw, and constraint language, transcriptions, etc. And this really dragged us as hackers and pen testers to the downgrade. If you want to continue to work with PowerShell, all the things, this juicy stuff from PowerShell, basically 5, forced us to downgrade to PowerShell 2. PowerShell 2 kind of evades all these unique capabilities that PowerShell created since PowerShell 4 plus some KB articles, and basically PowerShell 5 and above. So you either have to downgrade to PowerShell version 2, which is not too bad. It's very similar in terms of functionality, and most of the scripts will run just fine. Or you can move to some other tools, Python or writenative.net, because these auditing and logging capabilities are so good that not to mention what I just showed you now, that they really can make you ponder if you want to continue to use PowerShell as a vector, as an attack tool in post-exploitation. And PowerShell indeed is a very worthy post-exploitation tool. But then came our team in Javelin, and this is a fresh research that we did, led by Omer Yair and the team, Guy Franco, Eyal Neemani, and Ephraim Nurbeger. And we created InvisiShell, which I know that Omer spoke to you about that. Basically, it's our latest research that was also featured in last DerbyCon, shows how we bypass all of that, everything I just spoke briefly about, including AMSI, including the anti-malware service interface. And I urge you to, the piece of code that we released to GitHub, forked on my GitHub and in Omer's, I really encourage you to see the DerbyCon talk, or even here on one of the latest episodes on Security Weekly spoke about that and demonstrated the tool. And that's a really cool research we've been excited about. We shared the findings with Microsoft. One piece of the code we are able to share on GitHub, and it works nice. Some other piece of the code really has implications that we prefer to get the green light from Microsoft before sharing that code. So that's I encourage you to continue to follow Omer on Twitter and continue to follow that GitHub and see how it gets even more exciting. Finally, I don't know if we'll go into showing all this, but basically, you have to clean up. You have to clean up after yourself, right? You are basically, when you're doing stuff on a machine, whether it's through a shell, a console, or locally, interactively, opening MSTSC sessions, running processes, etc. All this gets recorded in multiple places, not only registry, of course in registry, but also in prefetch and other environments. I created a script for you because of the poor performance of the remote VMs. I'm not sure I will demonstrate all of it, but like I promised, all of the code, everything you see and now is already published on my GitHub. So you can access it. That's pretty much here a set of, querying for profiles and terminal services. You can actually see, for example, these are all registry-based, but then you get to prefetch, and you can see which applications ran on this machine and at what times, etc. Even if you removed the executable or application, it's still recorded in the prefetch. So there's a bunch of stuff here to check for prefetch and also to use prefetch analyzing. So you can have really fun stuff with that and play with that later. And this will help you about cleaning most of the stuff, not all of it, of course, because there's a bunch of other places that you leave your traces behind. Essentially, to be very thorough with your digital footprints, to be 100% evasive is a very hard job. And that's why most PTs don't do it, not only because they're not allowed, but because it really takes a lot of time, field time on the engagements, because to come back to all the systems you were and delete everything from shim cache and stuff like that. I will show you just one more thing, which is the automatic destinations. Not sure how many know that, but this type of file, which is totally unreadable, it's automatically collected every time you do something, open a document, run a program. So basically, these are not readable on the normal tools, but if you use a reader, a structured storage viewer, and you open those files, so you can actually see things that happened in that machine in various moments in time, and it logs everything you do. Like, I downloaded some DSC resource zip file here, that you can see, and you can see to which folder it was downloaded. And here maybe we'll find some other things. So yeah, I don't know what I did here, but anyway, as you understand, there's a lot of places to clean up after yourself. So some things to keep in mind about persistence, because we're talking about covering tracks, evading detection, etc. So detection goes very well with persistence. And really the thing is that anything that can be related or traced back to a process, service, WMI subscription, events, registry key, etc., all this can be either detected or terminated, right? Depending on whether you're an attacker and you don't want to be detected, or whether you're actually a process or a service or whatever that has some persistence on the machine that is of the blue team, some sort of EPP or EDR or any kind of defense mechanism. Because all those defense mechanisms, most of them at least, by default, they have a sort of persistence, an agent or a client side. So it's fairly straightforward to understand how they work and to knock them off, either by loading a driver in memory and killing them, or by simply just elevating to system and taking them off, or whatever it takes. So all the known defense tools, there are known ways to knock them out, right? Everything, port knocks, traps, whatever. So we took a different approach in Javelin, which is worth mentioning in few words. In our product, AD Protect, like I said, I'm an AD protector, a proud AD protector. We took the approach of an in-memory dissolvable agent. And what this means is basically we use injections, rope injections in user mode to inject in our deception, our obfuscated objects. So we use that on the client side and we inject that through the network. We are basically behaving like an attacker. So we're using the other way around than I showed you. Just now I showed you protected event logging, that I use defense techniques as an attacker for offensive. And what we do in Javelin, we use offensive techniques for defense. And this way, we're just somewhere, in the stack or somewhere in memory. Good luck finding us. And even if you want to try and kill us where we're hiding, you just have to blue screen the machine, and then you're cutting off the tree you're climbed at. So that really makes our detection and of course to stop the defense that we do, the deception, is really challenging because we don't have persistence. So that's about that. And as a side note, we also have in AD Protect as a totally built-in and integrated section that does a sort of a security assessment for your domain, and it detects the stuff that we saw now, the DCSync users when they're added, etc. Among another list of vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, from the basic stuff, like SMB1 and group policy, C password in XML files, and up to really more advanced attacks and techniques used up to date in the most recent findings and research around Active Directory security. So finally, we had a try catch, and finally, some final thoughts. Just think about security descriptors differently. They may go further in some occasions than group membership of privileged accounts. Of course, that doesn't mean that going after the privileged accounts is something of the past, but I think moving forward, we'll see that taking more and more place. And basically, just remember the yin-yang of life, right? Everything, it's all about the yin-yang. So you can defend as an attacker, you can attack as a defender, and just don't be, too locked and biased about the stuff as they seem. Always try to attack from different angles and try to surprise yourself and later the customer. Because we will do anything to catch the flag, and we have a good record of catching flags without getting detected. So So that's about it. I have all the references and resources sorted out here. Definitely encourage you. We spoke about the blue team, protected event logging. You'll find the scripts there, but definitely encourage you to look at Omer, Yair, and team, our work about bypassing all partial security features. That's really exciting things that's going on right now, and that's about it.
That's awesome, Yossi. Thank you so much. I think it really kind of was unique because we don't, as pen testers, right? Like I said at the top of the segment, we don't get the opportunity to do some of this stuff. So to see it in practice and also look at ways to detect it is really awesome. Yossi, I just have 5 final questions for you.
Sure.
Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yes, I do.
Alrighty, 3 words to describe yourself.
AD protector, guitarist, father.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
My hands.
I think that evil laugh would have done it for me, actually. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
If I had to, sorry?
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
I think Gone Baby Gone.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I'm not familiar with that game. Grabby Grabby? That sounds like something that has to do with the talk you had before I came in. But I'd rather be grabbed, I guess.
I think that means you go first, although it depends if it's American or European rules, but in any case. Yossi, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Well, I think if I want a really awkward childhood, then maybe Johnny Depp and Marilyn Monroe.
Oh my God.
But seriously, you know, maybe I think about Mercedes Sosa and Joe Satriani.
Very nice. Yossi, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, and everybody, and all the team, Johnny, everybody that helped to prep the call. And thanks so much for having me.
And with that, we will take a short break, come back, talk about the security news for this week. Stay tuned.